Sorry, I shouldn't even attack them at that level. I just can't handle it anymore.
Like I said, if we lie to the government, we go to jail. They lie to us all the time, and they get promoted.
It looks very nefarious. It looks extremely criminal.
Why
what the federal government has done?
Why would federal agents...
It's totally criminal.
Okay, Sheriff, why would federal agents want Mexican drug gangs to get into the United States, directly or indirectly, acquire these weapons, take them back to Mexico, and then shoot at Americans?
Why would Hitler blow up his own government building and pose as a savior? It's called problem, reaction, solution. Yeah, it's called the Hegelian dialectic.
Their own agents have exposed this. That's what we need to... This isn't some right-wing conspiracy.
What was the purpose of this operation? To the best of your knowledge, Mr. Special Agent Newell.
Mr. Cummings, thank you for the question. The purpose of this investigation was to identify and disrupt and dismantle an entire firearms trafficking organization that was linked to a Mexican drug cartel. That was the purpose.
But it was not to let guns walk, is that correct?
No.
I don't know if you... Go ahead.
No, sir. As I said in my statement, sir, one of the things that it frustrates me to some extent is there's that belief, and at no time in our strategy was it to allow guns to be taken to Mexico. No, sir.
Now, you testified here today earlier, no part in the strategy to allow guns to be taken to Mexico. It was no part in the strategy to allow guns to be taken to Mexico. Is that right?
To knowingly allow guns to go to Mexico, yes.
To knowingly allow guns to
go
to Mexico?
in this case, we did everything. We had seizures in this case when we had evidence.
I asked you a specific question. I said that there was no part in the strategy to allow guns to go to Mexico. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
January 8th, 2010, in this memo, point number 13, you write, or it is written, currently our strategy is to allow the transfer of firearms to continue to take place, albeit at a much slower pace in order to further the investigation, allow for the identification of additional co-conspirators who would continue to operate and illegally traffic firearms to Mexico drug trafficking organizations. So it was the goal, it was the intention of the program to allow guns to be trafficked to Mexico, based on this memo. Is that correct?
No, sir.
What's wrong with it? That's from your statement. It also says in here, a number of different seizures in Mexico. It seems very inconsistent at best to suggest that it was not the purpose to allow them to go to Mexico, yet you know in 2009 that they're going to Mexico, and you put it in a memo in 2010, January 2010.
So you knew the weapons were going to Mexico. Were you at some point going to let Special Agent Canino know about it?
Mr. Canino knew about the investigation.
He knew that weapons were going into Mexico.
Well, absolutely, yes.
Special Agent Canino, I just heard Special Agent Newell say that you knew about this gun walking. Can you please?
Yes, sir. I want to make it perfectly clear to you, the American people, the Mexican government, my family, my friends. At no time, ever, did I know that ATF agents were following known, suspected gun traffickers, one of which bought 700 guns, and we knew about his guns showing up in Mexico 6 weeks after we opened up that investigation. Never, ever would I imagine that we were letting that happen. We have 4,000 investigations, plus or minus, with Mexico-U.S. nexus. There are guns coming in. That's trafficking. The guns are coming into Mexico. I have no clue that we were allowing these guys to operate like this.
It all began with an ATF program called Fast and Furious, in which the United States government allowed guns to be smuggled to Mexican drug runners in order to find out where Mexican drug runners were getting their guns. It turned out to be from our government. Actually,
the agency's explanation is clearly false on its face. Well, we wanted to see where they would go in Mexico so we could get the drug cartel and bring them down. Well, that was news to the Mexicans.
At the center of Operation Fast and Furious, 20 defendants accused of trafficking guns to Mexico.
We feel very strongly that we have completely dismantled, if not significantly dismantled, a major firearms trafficking organization.
But after thousands of man-hours and millions spent going after that violent criminal gang, we expected to find the suspects in jail, and we were wrong.
My name's William Lajeunesse. I'm a correspondent with Fox News. Is there anything you want to say to these people who've been harmed by the guns that you bought?
No. Out of the 20, only one went to jail. The rest went free.
Bottom line, this was a very big case, very expensive for taxpayers, and yet all but one guy was let out within 24 hours.
The very first weapon recovered in Mexico through a trace. Did you go back to the purchaser of that weapon and interrogate him?
I do not know, sir.
Did anyone with ATF?
I'm not aware of that, no, sir.
Why not?
I don't know, sir.
You've got a gun that was purchased in Mexico, that purchased in the United States, that makes it into Mexico. You know through your trace that that's the gun. Did you go back to the person who purchased it? That's an old-fashioned investigative technique. It's not as complicated as letting guns walk. It is more effective, though, to actually go interrogate the person who made the acquisition. Did you do that?
Well, sir, as I stated earlier, in this investigation, realizing that if you take off one straw purchaser, you're not making an impact on the greater organization.
Right. I want to ask you about the greater investigation, because I've written down 4 different times you've said disrupt, dismantle, destroy.
Yes, sir.
How are you going to extradite drug kingpins from Mexico?
We don't have plans to do that, no, sir.
So once the guns make it to Mexico, there's nothing you were going to do about those drug kingpins?
Yes, sir, there was.
What?
One of the things we wanted to do was, as soon as we had solid information on who the drug kingpin, if you will, was, to share that information with Mexico.
But you didn't share the information with Mexico ahead of time.
Well, sir, we did.
So they're supposed to trust American law enforcement, who's been conducting an investigation and knows firearms are going into Mexico, and you tell them after the fact, and they're supposed to thank you and be partners in this endeavor?
Well, sir, it wasn't only until we had information on who the specific recipient or the drug kingpin was that we felt it was prudent to share that information, because we weren't sure.
How are you going to dismantle Mexican drug cartels if you're not going to extradite the kingpins back to the United States?
Because we hope that the Mexican officials will, in fact, prosecute them for that.
So you're doing this to help the Mexican criminal justice system. You're just not going to tell the Mexican criminal justice system about it.
No, sir, I disagree with that premise.
Well, that's exactly what you just said, Special Agent, that you were going to tell them about it after the fact. Okay, you got the first trace that tells you a U.S. gun is found in Mexico. Why did you not go interview the person who acquired the gun? Why not do the investigation the old-fashioned way, with car stops, with search warrants, with active surveillance? Why do it this way? It was never going to work.
Well, again, years of experience have shown us, sir, that removing one straw purchaser will not have an effect on a larger investigation.
Well, Special Agent, the only way it possibly could have worked would have been if Mexico had extradited these kingpins. If you want to disrupt, dismantle, destroy, the only way it could work is if you told Mexico, or I would have settled for you just telling your own fellow agents about it ahead of time, because ATF in Mexico didn't know about it, did they?
Well, sir.
Yes or no? Did Mexico ATF office know about this?
They were aware of the investigation, yes, sir.
They were aware that weapons were going into Mexico, and you knew about it?
That we knew about it?
When the first gun showed up in Mexico,
he was
that
aware.
You knew was from Phoenix. The first one that was connected to this showed up in Mexico. Did you go interview the straw purchaser?
No, sir, we did not.
Why not?
Because, again, our strategy was that we, knowing from years of experience, you take off one straw purchaser, you're not having an effect on the greater organization, which is, at that point, in November of 2009, you have to realize it wasn't even.
Have you ever flipped a cooperating witness before?
Yes, I have.
How do you do it without asking them? How do you do it without interviewing them?
It depends on what your goals in the investigation are.
Your goal is to bring down an organization. It's very compelling testimony to have someone from within the organization testify against his comrades, right?
Yes, sir.
So why didn't you approach him?
Approach who, sir? The one straw purchaser?
Yes, the straw purchaser.
Again, the goal, sir, in this case was to take off the whole organization. We felt that by just trying to flip one straw purchaser, if he in fact did flip, it would not affect the overall goal of.
So
the gentleman's time has expired.
From a law enforcement standpoint, I mean, did this operation make any sense at all?
It doesn't. Where it came from is this concept when we allow drugs or cash or sometimes a criminal walk. We may watch a crime in progress where we can take lawful action. We allow that criminal to go in an effort to watch its spiderweb and to see how many people we can catch. They use the same concept with weapons, and this is pure insanity. It's never been done before to give weapons like this, and their idea was to track the weapons. There was no tracking mechanism. Now all these guns are nowhere to be found.
And my understanding is that the way you were, quote, surveilling them was that you were putting GPS systems on them. Is that correct?
On the firearms or on vehicles? Depends on, we used all kinds of investigative techniques to further investigation to try to determine if, in fact, the firearms were going to Mexico.
Would the gentlelady yield? We have previous testimony that 3 times and only 3 times were any electronic tracking devices placed on the products.
Only 3 times?
Yes, correct.
And that those batteries ran out is what I was told as well.
Exactly.
These executives, the executives at ATF, these guys are counterfeit leaders. They're counterfeit executives. Most of America, after the testimony they saw, Bill Newell and Bill McMahon, wouldn't trust those guys to mow their grass, let alone lead an international firearms trafficking investigation.
There is a war in Mexico right now. It's a war between the government and the violent drug cartels, and a war amongst the drug cartels themselves for power, for control of the lucrative drug trade. And how are they fighting that war? They're fighting that war with weapons they acquire in the United States.
New records show the ATF actually bought weapons using taxpayer money, sold them to a suspected cartel buyer, then watched as the guns disappeared.
So in essence, it's a two-way street. The drugs come north, the guns and the money, and the ammunition. It's not just the guns. The ammunition goes south. So it's a vicious cycle of violence.
12 corpses found next to a road on July 13th in the Michoacan region. They belong to policemen that were tortured before being killed. The perpetrators are members of La Familia, one of the biggest drug cartels in Mexico.
The violence in Mexico is escalating by the day. The mayor of a small town in the state of Tamaulipas became the latest victim of suspected drug hitmen. He is the second mayor to be assassinated in the state, which borders southeast Texas.
So far this year, 11 Mexican mayors have been murdered.
You have access to, obviously, the emails of Dennis Burke. On Wednesday, November 24th, 2010, he sent an email. It said, quote, "Some of the weapons bought by these clowns in Arizona have been directly traced to murders of elected officials in Mexico by the cartels. So, Katie, bar the door when we unveil this baby," end quote.
Gunmen massacred 72 Central and South American migrants.
47 people killed this past weekend alone. A hand grenade exploded in a busy town square in Guadalupe. Earlier, 3 explosives blew up elsewhere in Monterrey, one near the U.S. consulate. This woman says, "We don't feel safe being out on the streets anymore."
This is violence directed against the Mexican state. Innocents are now being intimidated or murdered. Mexico is at peril.
In the small town of Ascension, gunmen working for the ruthless Sinaloa drug cartel kidnapped and killed the police chief and then murdered 5 of his 31 men. Fearing they could be next, the town's remaining 26 officers turned in their guns and quit, leaving the town unprotected. It's a war that has now claimed 40,000 lives in the last 5 years.
We have a hand and responsibility in this violence that has come to the United States, but more importantly, Mexico is our partner. They're not our enemy, and we facilitated guns into the cartels that have worked to topple the Mexican government.
Emails show 3 White House officials were briefed about the operation, and now authorities want to know why an Arizona man supplying Mexican cartels with, get this, grenades was let go by the feds.
This so-called Iron River of guns from the United States arms Mexican drug cartels to the teeth.
Mexico's nightmare came to Capitol Hill today. Let's bring in our Homeland Security correspondent, Jean Meserve. It was a lively session.
It certainly was, and this is what they were talking about, this U.S.-Mexico border, the violence there and what the U.S. is doing about it.
Senators keyed in on the U.S. contribution to the violence, guns.
What do you think is the volume of weapons being smuggled into Mexico from the United States on a daily basis?
I would not say it's in the thousands, sir. I would say it's probably in the hundreds.
If it's hundreds or thousands, the best efforts that we put in it to date are really not addressing the volume of the problem.
An ATF official testified that in the past 6 months, his agency has seen a troubling increase in the number of grenades seized from or used by traffickers. And there's a growing worry they will be used on the U.S. side of the border, Wolf.
Do we know where those grenades are coming from?
Well, they didn't talk about that in the hearing today.
Do we know where those grenades are coming from?
Well, they didn't talk about that in the hearing today.
If you were alarmed by Fast and Furious, brace yourself for Grenade Gate.
It expands from handguns to AK-47s. Now grenades went to Mexican drug dealers.
The Department of Justice also apparently released a dangerous explosives runner after the guy had already been arrested and was in custody. Why?
But remember, we have a federal government caught not just shipping tens of thousands of guns to Mexico. CBS News, we now learn, hand grenades. That's not from a gun shop.
Not walking guns, but involving grenades, and a suspect allegedly left to traffic and manufacture them for Mexican drug cartels.
Police say Jean-Baptiste Kingery, a U.S. citizen, was a veritable grenade machine. He's accused of smuggling parts for as many as 2,000 grenades into Mexico for killer drug cartels, sometimes under the direct watch of U.S. law enforcement.
Photos of grenades and ammunition shedding light on the bungled case of an alleged cartel arms dealer. The ATF was apparently up to its eyeballs in this one. Plus, they were supposed to be tracking him, but instead they let him go twice. Sound familiar?
Sources tell CBS News that in January 2010, ATF had Kingery under surveillance after he bought about 50 grenade bodies and headed to Mexico. But they say prosecutors wouldn't agree to make a case. So as ATF agents looked on, Kingery and the grenade parts crossed the border and simply disappeared. 6 months later, Kingery allegedly got caught leaving the U.S. from Mexico with 114 disassembled grenades in a tire. One ATF agent told investigators he literally begged prosecutors to keep Kingery in custody this time, fearing he was supplying narco-terrorists, but was again ordered to let Kingery go.
And assaults with guns and grenades on 2 police stations. After this attack, the entire police force quit.
This is a criminal White House, so criminal. They're caught shipping guns into Mexico, drugs back into the U.S., and now we learn hand grenades. Yeah, it wasn't just some gun shops they told sell guns. That was the cover. Once it started to come out in federal cases where one arm didn't know what the other arm was doing. And they were bringing people into court who were declaring national security and had all these documents, and the feds were coming in and saying, yeah, drop this. They're a national security asset.
Kingery could have been prosecuted twice in the U.S. for violating export control laws, but that each time prosecutors in Arizona refused to make a case.
He got stopped by the United States. U.S. Attorney's Office says they didn't have an appetite for it.
It lacked jury appeal. This is 200 grenades with someone who has confessed to being part of a Mexican drug cartel. And the United States Attorney's Office in Arizona said it lacked jury appeal.
The prosecutors, already the target of controversy for overseeing Fast and Furious, wouldn't comment on the grenade case. U.S. Attorney Dennis Burke recently resigned, and his assistant Emery Hurley has been transferred. Sources say Hurley is the one who let Kingery go, saying grenade parts are novelty items, and the case lacked jury appeal.
It lacked jury appeal. They didn't think a jury would like 200 and something grenades that are being used by Mexican drug cartels. So they would not authorize a prosecution. He was Mirandized and gave a confession. You don't even have to be a good prosecutor to win that case.
Well, what,
they let him go.
As I understand it, the Justice Department is saying, yes, ATF arrested this guy, who was a very dangerous guy by all accounts. I mean, serious, up to his neck in grenades and manufacturing improvised explosive devices. So they get him. They have him in custody. ATF, according to the reports, was horrified at the thought of releasing him and practically begged the senior prosecutor in DOJ for permission to arrest him. And they wanted him to stay in custody. And DOJ is now saying, we wanted to continue surveillance. We do this in some cases where you got the guy, but then you let him go so you can follow him, and maybe he brings you to somebody more important on the totem pole.
Grenades are weapons of choice for the cartels. A recent attack on a casino killed 53 people.
53 people killed. I mean, it's just horrible. The tragedy goes with it. The United States Attorney's Office, at least, they were only concerned with tracking it. In fact, they said even if it explodes, you can track it. So they didn't care if it exploded. I guess you could say they didn't have that much concern for human life.
Mexican authorities raided Kingery's stash house and factory, finding materials for 1,000 grenades there. He's charged with trafficking and allegedly admitted to making making grenades, teaching cartels how to make them, and helping them convert semi-automatic rifles to fully automatic. As one source puts it, there's no telling how much damage Kingery did in the year and a half since he was first let go.
Was there a number to put on how many people may have died from these grenades as the U.S. Attorney's Office looked the other way? No way to quantify that?
No, ma'am. Much like Fast and Furious, the body count may be, we may still be counting it in the future. These grenades and these guns are unaccounted for.
Thousands are dead. It's called a false flag. To destabilize Mexico, blame the Second Amendment.
One Mexican official, a top Mexican official, once told me, yeah, the U.S. is involved in the drug war, unfortunately on the wrong side.